Welcome to another great session. Our podcast sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is a free download, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And you can also get McKinsey and BCG winning resume, which is a resume that got offers from both firms. And you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And you can take a look at it and see how you can improve your resume. And today we have with us Viva Ona Bartkus, who is a former partner at McKinsey Company and the founder of the course Business on the Frontlines. And she's also Professor Emerita at the University of Notre Dame's Mendoza College of Business. Welcome, Viva. So great to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Could you share with us your journey that brought you to the work you're doing now?
Certainly. I think what I'd like to start with is the fact that I came from a very small town in rural Indiana, and I am the child of Lithuanian World War II refugee immigrants. I grew up in a very tight-knit Catholic small town community. And in some ways, my journey to McKinsey was also my journey to see so much of the world. I, even as a small child, was intensely curious. I always read National Geographic and looked at all of the photos of all the different places of the world. And for me, McKinsey started as a ticket to see the rest of the world. What my work at the firm became was something even more special. McKinsey represented a tremendous opportunity for me to learn and to serve. And although everyone focuses really on the tough business problem solving that management consultants do, what that really tough problem solving efforts do is they open up the possibility of helping people be more successful. Those people being our clients with aspirations, with problems, with trying to run their businesses better. And for me, it became very rewarding, meaningful, and worthwhile work to serve clients and help them be more successful. So that was my journey into the world of management consulting.
Viva, and do you remember at what point you decided, you know what, I will try consulting?
Honestly, consulting wasn't on my original path. I think if you are any sort of normal kid coming through high school or college, there are many professions that come up before you would even think about management consulting. But in graduate school, I had a number of students who were ahead of me in graduate school that joined McKinsey Company and just gave tremendous feedback on how much they were learning and how much they were enjoying their work. And because I respected these former students so much, now graduates, it made me really reconsider my paths in life and my professional career and really think about management consultant as a possibility.
And when you entered consulting, what was it like, that path to partnership?
Well, the path to McKinsey and the path to partnership was certainly not a straightforward one at the time. I was in the first class that McKinsey hired with non-MBAs. So these are professional degrees that were in other fields, but not in the business arena. So first of all, my fellow associates and I that came into the New York office at the time had to do a special training program for an entire month, which McKinsey ended up calling the mini MBA. This was a tremendous, tremendous bridge from my own field into business and got me prepared on that. I cannot say that there were a lot of women at the time. And so I very much enjoyed having the one or two role models over the years that I did have that were juggling responsibilities at work and family and other things, other fellow women. I was the first female and non-MBA and youngest partner in the Chicago office. So that was certainly an interesting experience walking into my first partnership meeting. The way I like to describe it is it's the opposite of going to the theater. When you go to the theater and there is a break in the theater production, there is a really long line at the women's bathroom. When you walk into a McKinsey partner meeting this many years ago, there was no line for the women's bathroom. So, but over time, there were many women who came up behind me and were able to become really successful in the firm, so much so that over time, you did have to wait in the bathroom during the partners' meetings breaks. So hopefully that sort of describes the early days.
It does. Thank you so much. And could you take us a little bit through different levels and your experience at each level and kind of key things that make you successful at a particular level?
So the first lesson I think folks should learn as they're coming into management consulting is that you only get one shot to make a good first impression. The way the firm evaluates associates and engagement managers and associate principals and principals is really on a set of intrinsics and performance. And you want to massively over-deliver at the beginning so that your reputation is one of really strong intrinsics. Over time, all of us inevitably stumble. But at that point, what you want to do is have a very good reputation so that the stumble is just something that happens and you recover from that, as opposed to any sort of perception or reputation that you may be lacking in some of the important aspects of McKinsey performance, whether it be on problem solving or teamwork or leadership or empathy or any of these dimensions. So honestly, your first 6 months, your first 9 months, I don't really care. Like you don't do anything else. You just massively over deliver so that everyone knows that you are the safest pair of hands, that the partners can go home on the weekend, that you're going to get the work done really well, that you're going to bring up issues early and often to problem solve them together, and you're going to provide exceptional service to the client. That would be sort of my advice as you think about a career within McKinsey & Company.
I 100% agree with you. That was always my approach. And it just came naturally as well. And I would feel like I'm not an owner of the company, but I feel like I'm responsible, I'm accountable, I have to get it done, whatever it takes. And I will not sleep nights, weekends. I will not sleep a few days in a row if I have to. Whatever it takes, you do the work as best as you possibly can.
I'm in 100% agreement. And I think that's what makes the places like McKinsey & Company very special, is that such a disproportionate amount of all of the folks that work at the firm really take that at heart, that clients' interests really come first, and you have to look after them first and foremost.
Do you remember a moment when you got promoted to partner? What was it like?
You know, there are many emotions that are coming through my mind at the present time. The way the firm works is that you have partners from other offices evaluate partner candidates for election. And I still remember the director out of the Canadian practice out of Toronto, that was the person who was evaluating me. And this may not be standard practice, but at the end of all of his evaluations and at the end of all of the internal partner meetings at the firm, he gave me a call and he gave me the really good news. But then he also flew down to Chicago just to spend an evening with me. He wanted to get to know me personally rather than what everyone else was saying and, you know, from what I was on paper. And he personally wanted to give me advice on what I could do better. He clearly was investing in me as a business professional, and he was clearly investing in me as an individual. And to this day, I am still completely loyal to him. We exchange Christmas greetings every year. This has now been decades later. I think this is what it takes to really run a professional services firm well. There's all the things that are expected, and then there are the things that people do that go above and beyond that just make you even more motivated and even more loyal and even more excited about the opportunities that you have. That's my recollection.
Thank you so much for sharing this. So let's transition to your work now. Maybe you could help us transition by letting us know kind of how you decided to leave McKinsey and then what happens after McKinsey and then your current work.
I think the question of how I left McKinsey, I think we have to reframe a little bit and step back just a little bit, which is my first love was really around teaching the life of the mind, research. I really loved that. And I did take a meandering path into McKinsey and consulting. But at some point, I think in my heart, I knew I would come back to my first love, which is really the life of the mind, looking after young people, mentoring, teaching, ongoing scholarship and research. So there's really no there's no implicit criticism at all of McKinsey or the work that I was doing there or my colleagues. It was much more that I felt like I had to return to the place where I'm most authentically myself. And, at the time, it was such an unprecedented sort of decision. I had to fly to New York to explain myself to some of the senior partners, mainly because at the time, it was quite common practice for McKinsey consultants to get hired by their clients and to continue to work many of the similar things. But in the client setting, this was a completely different path and not necessarily as understandable. And so what I wanted to do was, in those conversations in New York with senior colleagues who had supported me and helped me get elected and provided me tremendous coaching, is that it's not a rejection of you or what the firm does, but it's me going home. And I went home in two ways. One, back to my first love of academia, and two, coming back to within a stone's throw of where I was born in northern Indiana to go to the University of Notre Dame, which is an incredible faith-based Catholic institution. I'm Catholic. I'm from northern Indiana. I got to live right next to my parents and to my brother. It was a wonderful transition. And when I explained it, many people were really excited and celebrating with me on the decision.
So let's talk about your current work. You're doing so much and such important work. So let's start with, what is a frontline environment?
A frontline environment. You have now asked me, as a professor, to give you a lecture on my favorite subject. So I will try to do it without becoming long-winded, as my students always fear that I might become. So the way I would think about the front lines is those geographies, those communities in low-income and middle-income countries that lie 100 miles away from an international airport. Many international business leaders, as they're thinking about investment, are quite happy to fly to Nairobi or Kampala, but spend, I don't know how many, 8 hours driving 100 miles outside of that in Kenya or Uganda. The investment doesn't extend that far. And so these areas are largely impoverished, isolated, fragmented, and frequently a little lawless. And so that has prevented investment in these enormous underdeveloped, potentially large growth areas. They've been overlooked by corporations, certainly over the last 20 years of globalization, but they're not going to be overlooked that much longer. We argue in our book, Business on the Edge, how to turn a profit and improve lives in the world's toughest places, that this is going to represent the next great round of globalization opportunities. How's that? It wasn't too long of a lecture.
It wasn't at all. You make the case for bringing business to the front lines. So let's talk about why.
Why would you consider a impoverished, isolated, frequently lawless set of areas for business investment? It's a valid question. Absolutely. Our argument is that the opportunity is vast. By our calculations, you have 1.4 billion people who live and work in the front lines, and they generate over $20 trillion of annual economic activity. Now, the challenge of investing in these areas is that the traditional approaches are not going to work. This is not business as usual. So, for example, if you were in business school and you took an international business class, the conventional wisdom is, as you're looking to expand internationally, you find yourself a local partner, you partner with them, and they open doors internally. In places like the front lines that are less stable, much more uncertain and impoverished, that kind of strategy can really lead you to a less preferred place, let's say. You end up having a set of situations where you could have misinformation, bad decision-making, even fraud and regime change. And so, in contrast, we're saying you have to partner with a myriad of actors. Many of them will be untraditional business allies. That's more difficult. It's not business as usual, but there's money to be made. And as you do this, you're also going to reduce poverty and conflict in these challenging environments. If you'd like, I can give you an example of how we learn this the hard way.
Yes, let's do it.
So this question of not business as usual, not the traditional textbook approach, we really learned in Lebanon. So our operations in Lebanon, so over the course of 15 years, we've worked in 30 countries, all of them, isolated, tough, frequently conflict-ridden places around the world, with tremendous business opportunity, but difficult. And in Lebanon, we started out doing the classic textbook approach. We had a partner introduced to us by an incredibly respected international humanitarian organization. That partner was a leading civic leader and business leader in Lebanon. The Lebanese have built on trading. He was a trader and a merchant, and he had built up an electronics import-export company. In southern Beirut, he was the guy to go to for assistance in a number of different arenas. I mean, there were meetings with his name was Khalil. Khalil was jovial and sort of in his mid to late 40s, weather-beaten face, salt and pepper hair. He was incredibly warm. He was incredibly welcoming. We'd be having meetings and people would come up to him and, he would either talk in Arabic or in French or in English, and he'd provide them assistance. Oh, we need our doors opened here. We need a job opportunity here. This school needs some extra, gosh, you name it, chairs, computers, whatever. So he was incredibly well connected. And we thought, okay, this is going to be a really good partner for us as we do our work in Lebanon. But along the way, we normally talk to everyone. We start interacting with everyone. We find common ground with everyone, whether it's the hotel bellboy or our taxi or the pharmacist on the corner or the traders or things like that. And we take an interest in people's lives. We find that we have similar music tastes or we like similar food or things like that. And over time, through hushed whispers, we ended up finding out that Khalil is not who we think Khalil is. It turns out that Khalil is the area Hezbollah commander and essentially is incredibly well connected across Beirut, mainly because over time, he's going to get all of the folks that he helped, then hide his troops or hide his guns or hide his missiles and the like. Now, if we didn't have as wide and broad-based partnerships, if we had done the classic business school textbook, we would not have found out that the person we thought was a civic business leader actually had far more nefarious purposes. Stepping back from that experience, we'd like to relate to those who are really looking at frontline opportunities to say, okay, take some extra time, get to know a broader set of people, listen, build common ground. And over time, you will understand the landscape, you will understand the environment better, and then understand who are the multiple different non-traditional allies and partners you're going to build relationships with to really get your business off the ground in these arenas.
And what industries in the front lines hold the most promise?
The Frontlines has potential for all sorts of business activity, but the sequencing of investment actually matters. So the Frontlines are really represent exciting business opportunities where they have the competitive advantage. And where their competitive advantage comes from is the underdeveloped land, so natural resources, and their low-cost labor. So you can think of sectors of the economy and companies within those sectors like mining, agricultural processing, infrastructure, and the like. So those are the most promising early opportunities. So let's, in the same way we had our last discussion, let's just talk through an example to illustrate this. I learn much better through examples. For example, Newmont Mining is one of the largest gold mining companies in the world. They opened up a very large gold mine in northern Ghana, and it had direct employees of about 1,700 miners. So you can see how the sequencing of investment becomes important. The first investment comes in mining, but very quickly thereafter, those 1,700 miners had a whole set of other needs that other local suppliers could provide, like uniforms, like cleaning those uniforms, like food, like housing. And then those folks started having enough disposable income for banking, telecommunications, consumer goods. So you launch the flywheel of economic development through early investment in agriculture, mining, infrastructure, and the like. But very quickly thereafter, there becomes opportunities for services and other products. So that's how I would think about the opportunity.
And you've launched over 80 growth-oriented business solutions in 30 countries. That is a lot. And maybe you could tell us a little more about success stories, some of your most successful business solutions.
Oh, I'd be delighted to talk about our success stories. I'm pretty sure you're going to ask us about our failures next. So yes. I'll start with the success stories. The way that my co-author, Professor Emily Block, and I really think about success is sort of our impact on the ground, our insights, and our students, what they go off and do. So maybe we can take each one of those in turn, and then come back and talk about failures and the like. But on successes, first of all, these are difficult circumstances. So let's just lay the expectation down, which is half of this stuff fails because you take so much risk. You have to. And the way I define success here is that we actually made a meaningful difference on impact in the communities and territories that we've worked. And sometimes that takes 3 to 5 years because you can't get to something as quickly as 1 year. I know we all want immediate results. I know we want metrics that show us our impact in the space of a year or two, but I have to just prepare expectations and say, this is 3 to 5 years, just the way it is. So I'm going to talk about our work in Colombia, in rural areas in Colombia. Colombia had the longest running civil war in the Western Hemisphere of over 50 years. The Colombian government was fighting a Marxist leftist guerrilla group called the FARC, and the FARC controlled about 30% of Colombian land. In 2016, they negotiate an end to that conflict with the Havana Accords. And so then it became a challenge of, you have 8,000 of these former fighters, of these former guerrillas, giving up their arms, demobilizing, and reincorporating in society. However, a clear majority of Colombian society was not willing to forgive and forget, and was not willing to hire what they would deem as the perpetrators of violence. And let's be clear, many, many people suffered through this armed conflict. So what to do? If these demobilized fighters don't have a way to provide for themselves, they are going to melt back into the jungle and start fighting again, or they'll be hired by all the criminal elements that run the cocaine trade, out of Colombia. So it became a race. We partnered with an outstanding local organization called Paso Colombia that works for peace and reconciliation. We became their business partner, and we ended up interacting with a whole number of agricultural processing companies for basic produce, but also for coffee and cacao and other things like jungle fruits that Colombia can provide. And what we did is we helped establish local businesses with these former fighters. So they would demobilize, and they then started their businesses so that they could sell products that would go into the economy. Sometimes there weren't even markets in the places that we worked, so we had to establish the campesino markets, the farmers markets, to have an outlet for these products. What I can say is these leftist guerrillas were incredibly disciplined in rebuilding their lives. They were incredibly disciplined in working hard to establish these businesses. And, some of them are as simple as animal feed or organic fertilizer or other things that the neighbors would value so much that they would buy from them. Over time, and this is now 5 years later, what has happened is the neighbors, who were the campesinos that suffered a great deal during this armed conflict, started revising their skepticism and fear of the former guerrillas and started seeing them as suppliers. They were customers, these were suppliers, and they started having business interactions. Now, this area that I'm talking about is San Jose del Guaviare. It's in the jungle area, to the east of Colombia. And I'll tell you, we ended up getting lucky here in that before we started all this work, Guaviare was a net importer of food. Given atrocious infrastructure, bad transportation, lots of costs of importing the food, we were able to establish markets and agricultural production in such a way that they could provide customers lower cost local produce, which ended up creating a vibrant agricultural marketplace in Guaviare. Now, through these repeated commercial interactions, people have begun to rebuild trust amongst themselves in Guaviare. They're slowly reknitting the society. I can't tell you that things are perfect there, but there is a resilience and there is a slow building of community so that it will not just survive anymore, but will thrive. That would be an example of some of the impact that we've had in the front lines.
Thank
So
you.
that would be, an impact one.
Yes.
I'd like to share one on ideas, if that's as well. So ideas are where we've worked with our partners in the field, and they then take those ideas and run with them. So, for example, we've had multiple deployments with U.S. Army Special Forces in West Africa and Central America. We've worked with the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. And what we've really worked on there with the commanders and soldiers and our Special Forces teammates is how business can become a stabilizing force in these tough areas. Business provides a persistent presence. And when our soldiers understand that, and they can't remain because their deployments end, they can build relationships with local businesses to reinforce them, to reinforce the stability. It opens up the idea of conflict prevention. So how do you set out a set of initiatives before the bullets start flying? And what we did is we helped our soldiers really figure out how to do this and how to really point where there's going to be future instability and build that into their theater security plans. And the biggest compliment to us came from our Special Forces Command Sergeant Major. He 20 years Special Forces, burly, incredibly strong, tattooed all over, 5 deployments to Afghanistan. He said to us after all of our work together, he said, and you will excuse my French here, he said, when this process started, I thought to myself, what the blank can these 2 little girls teach me about war? And at the end, he said, now I can't stop thinking differently about how I would have spent $38 million on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. To me, this is the highest compliment. We now have a set of Special Forces soldiers who, instead of reaching for their gun first, are really thinking through what is the local situation here and how can I build stability by building partnerships with perhaps folks that I wouldn't have put on my list of folks I would interact with in a particular environment. That to me is one of the successes on the ideas side.
And what about lessons you learned from projects that didn't go as planned?
Well, as I said before, nothing in the front lines ever goes as planned, and well over 50% of our projects have failed. They have failed to achieve the impact we aspired for. I may have picked out 2 of my favorite successes, but there are easily that many and many more failures because we take risks and we experiment with bold new ideas. We rigorously study each failure and determine what we could do to change to improve successes in the future. Now, if I were to say what I've learned the most, you really have to verify data and information that you then put your decision making on from multiple sources, and never ever make assumptions on the motivations of local actors. I can't tell you how often I myself, who now have been doing this for years, still make the mistake of not necessarily listening as well as I should to try to understand what motivates some of our local actors. So effectively working in the front lines depends certainly on experimentation, certainly on improvisation, certainly on keeping multiple lanes open with the end goal in mind, but it also really, really depends on listening and walking in the footsteps of our potential partners and local actors. I did not understand that until probably a good 4 years into this work. And then I had I would say blessing, really the blessing, the benefit of working with the Catholic Archbishop of Zacapa, Guatemala. We were working with him to establish a coffee cooperative that might extend into other produce, mainly because food insecurity is so bad in this area of Guatemala. And what he said to me is, he said, walk in the footsteps of the campesinos, not to understand their hardships, but to understand their dreams. And that put everything on its head for me. Up until that time, I was my classic McKinsey problem solver. I'm coming in and I'm going to be problem solving because I'm a former partner of McKinsey, and I know a lot, and I'm completely dedicated, and I'm going to be doing this with my teams. What he essentially said to me, or what I took his guidance and his blessing to me, is you can learn from anyone. You can learn from the campesinos, and you should learn from anyone, and you should learn from the campesinos. And that put on my shoulders the responsibility to listen and learn from everyone. And I think this was one of the greatest lessons from our failures.
Do you remember the defining moment when you realized I want to do this work? Because it is very challenging what you're doing.
Yeah, I know exactly when that happened. I know exactly what that happened. So the question becomes, how did I really get into this work of essentially trying to harness the dynamism of business in rebuilding war-torn societies? So let me step back again and put a few of the pieces together. The first piece is my PhD, my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation at the University of Oxford. I'm Lithuanian by birth. This was at the time that Lithuania was gaining its independence. And I wanted to study the independence movement, the independence aspirations of my parents' homeland. My PhD supervisor at Oxford sat me down and said, essentially, Viva, the world does not need a PhD dissertation on how great the Lithuanians are. You're not objective. You're going to fail. Go away. Go find something else to do and then come back. And so what I ended up doing as a way of understanding what was going on in my parents' homeland is I studied the self-determination aspirations of other communities around the world. In the end, I completed the 26 cases of historical and current secession crises around the world. So you can imagine all of the places that I traipsed around with insurgents and guerrillas and others to do that research, whether it was Tibet and the Buddhist monks that had their aspirations for self-determination, the Karen and Kachin tribes in Burma, those in East Timor, Mindanao in the Philippines, across Africa, so Eritrea, South Sudan, Biafra in Nigeria, Kurdistan. This was also the same time that the former Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia were falling apart. I mean, I did have some case studies that were in perhaps less conflict-ridden places, like Quebec and Scotland and Catalonia and Flanders. But to me, there was this very important question of, why do communities really mobilize for self-determination? And that was not written about at the time that I was studying. And so it really required firsthand research and time in all of these places. You finish that chapter of your life, and the next chapter of your life, you're at McKinsey Company, and you're literally at the heights of the American economy. If you are not impressed by the sheer energy, dynamism, and creativity of major companies in the American economy, I don't know. It is remarkable. It is remarkable. The speed of business, the innovation, the sheer value creation. So I did that for 10 years, and I came back and said, look, and I didn't say to anyone, it was more just my own reflection that said, business has to be the dynamic backbone to any sort of sustainable improvement to people's lives. Or at least that was my conclusion from these years at McKinsey. And then if you go back to those places that I had been 10 years earlier, whether it be Kurdistan or Burma or East Timor or parts of Africa, what's really striking is the absence of business. So you have the World Bank, you have the IMF, you have United Nations, you have a number of really leading NGOs, humanitarian organizations doing a great deal of work. You look at this and you say, my goodness, there's anywhere between $2 and $3 trillion that have gone into these places since World War II, just through foreign aid. Just if you add up all the foreign aid. And I had a teaching assistant that had to do this for me, so I know this for a fact, that it is $2 to $3 trillion of aid. And yet, what's the return on investment for that? Almost nothing. Almost nothing. If you look at World Bank growth rates in what Paul Collier would call the bottom billion, they're actually negative. And so you have this set of circumstances that Americans almost couldn't understand, which is the grandchildren that are born now are worse off than their grandparents in the 1960s and 1970s. It became like a jigsaw puzzle. Rebuilding these war-torn societies became like a jigsaw puzzle for me. And I didn't know how the jigsaw puzzle would come together, but I knew from my own experience that there was an absence of business. And so through the University of Notre Dame and University of Notre Dame's support, we were able to start looking at these problems firsthand in country and figuring out what should be the role of business here. I really do think that the rebuilding of war-torn societies and serving societies ravaged by deep poverty is one of the great challenges of the 21st century. Starting with the humanity and the dignity of work seems to be the best place to start. And no matter how much aid or grants or anything else flows in to a particular country, until people have the dignity of work and can lift themselves out of poverty, no other approach is going to be sustainable. And so, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, we fail a lot. Yeah, it's exhausting. But it's meaningful and it's worthy. And by the time you look at our track record, whether it's 30,000 employed who wouldn't have had jobs, or 250,000 now that might be employed that wouldn't have had jobs, you start thinking each one of those is a family that now might be able to send their kids to school, or may be able to deal with a health crisis, or may be able to just move into a safer part of town, or may be working towards building resilience in a community. That's deeply meaningful and deeply worthy. And so you get up in the morning and you dust yourself off and you go try again, and you learn from your mistakes, and you fight the world's fight. You fight the good fight. So that's how all of this started. Just so it came from these jigsaw puzzles of a doctoral dissertation, traipsing around with insurgents and guerrillas, seeing things firsthand, coming to McKinsey and seeing really the power of business, and then coming back to these places and saying, wow, now you can really see what's missing. Let's figure out how business could contribute to this jigsaw puzzle of serving communities that have been ravaged by conflict and deep poverty, and working to empower communities to lift themselves out of poverty. I think I got awfully professorial on you on that one, so forgive me, but it is the passion of my life now.
Not at all, Viva. And I'm so grateful for all the work you are doing and an example you are setting, and the legacy. We never have any idea what our legacy is because we have no idea how many lives we are touching with our work. And I think we just all have to do absolutely the best we can because we're in a position to do something, to really make a difference and change things, move the world forward. Viva, thank you so much for all you do. Where can our listeners learn more about you, buy your book, anything you want to share?
Absolutely. So let me tell you, my co-author, Professor Emily Block, and I are really excited about the launch on July 16th of our book, Business on the Edge: How to Turn a Profit and Improve Lives in the World's Toughest Places. It's published by Basic Books, and it's available on Amazon now. We hope that you would pick up our book and then email us with your comments and thoughts. We would be delighted to engage in a conversation. Thank you very much.
Viva, thank you very much again for being here and for all the work you're doing.
This was such a pleasure. I was faced it with a bit of trepidation, and you just made it to be such a delight. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Our guest today again has been Viva Ona Bartkus. Check out Viva's book. It's called Business on the Edge. And our sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is a free download, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And you can also get McKinsey and BCG winning resume, which is a resume that got offers from both firms. And you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and I look forward to connect with you all next time.